Okay, welcome. In this lesson we are going to learn a little bit about the HTML forms, and I have set up a basic HTML, which is a basic form we are going to create. I have left out a few things here about the method and action. We will add that later. So the first thing we need is a form element, a form tag, and as you can see here we have opening form tag and a closing form tag, and we can create some attributes or some input elements inside a form. So a form is used to collect information from user. Now we could start with an input element, and input is the most basic is we use type equals text. So this is for collecting text information. Now in the most basic form we can have just an input type equals text. Actually I will show you this how this looks. Of course it's very basic, not really good form, but let's go here. So the basic form, if I open it in a browser, you can see I can type some text here. There is no there is no JavaScript or jQuery here, and there is no label also. So we need to tell the user what this form element, what are you typing here, belongs to, what's that information for. So the next thing we will do is add a label. Now there are a few ways we can add a label. The most basic is we can say name, and because this is this is the name, this will appear as it is, and if I refresh the form, oops, okay, so you can see name here, but this is not really good for the accessibility perspective. So there is a label tag that is introduced in HTML5 that we can use, and label name. Now what we need to do is this: we need to connect this label and input so that the browser knows that this label is for this input, and that's useful in a particular way. I'll show you. When you click on the label, the focus will be shifted to the corresponding input element. There are a couple of ways you can do this. One is, the simpler one is where you can put the input element inside the label. So if I refresh it now, okay, we see there is not much difference, but when I click on name, the focus comes on the name here. And so that's one way of creating a label. We have the input element, input tag inside the label. The other one is if you have an ID. So let's say we have an ID equals name, or yeah, we can just leave ID equals name. Then we can say for, so we have to specify what ID we are using, and then we don't have to make this nested. We can keep the label separate from the input element. Now you can see this for the label tag, there is a closing tag here, but for the input there is nothing else is required, so we close it. It's a self-closing, or we close the tag right here. So I can save this, and if I refresh, now it works the same. When I click on name, we get the focus on the corresponding input element. I can show you the page source, and this is our new source that we just created. Okay, now let's go back here. So there are benefits of doing things either way. We have for now we will need the ID tag, and we will talk about this when we write JavaScript or jQuery, but we do need the ID tag for making for doing validations and so on. Makes it easier. So we will leave the ID tag, and then we will keep the label separate. You can choose to keep the label, put the input tag inside label, that's also okay, and that's your choice. I'll introduce a couple of more input elements. Let's say we have something for email. So so the ID could be anything, but type equals email. Now this is important because there are a lot of type values for the attribute type that are introduced in HTML5. The benefit of using them is that there are some validations that the browser can do for you instead of you writing code in jQuery or JavaScript. For example, that the when we say type equals email, that shows that whatever is the ID, and even if there is no ID, I'll remove this for now to keep it simple. And let me save this, and I'll definitely add a label to make it look better. So, and this one I will mix it, and I will make this nested. So I'll put the input tag inside the label so that we can do without an ID, and that's what I want you to show, just so that you don't get confused. Now the type field is telling that this label here has this text, whatever we are putting here, has to be a valid email address. Now valid doesn't mean that the email address exists, but the format of the email address should be valid. So for example, I can write abcd at test, and now we know that test is not a valid domain name. We need dot and a couple of letters minimally. So if I now we don't have a submit button, so that's why it's not functioning. And so let's add a submit button. So we'll say input type equals submit, and that adds a button for us. And the submit button, now when I click a submit button, okay, so you can see here now when we don't have a validation which so we allow the empty email addresses, but you can see when I have some text here and I click submit, this validation that there has to be an @ symbol in the email address, that's validation. We didn't write any code, but that's done by the browser, because in HTML5 the type equals email is important, and that's what is telling that the email address has to be valid. So let's add @ symbol, and we click submit, and it says there has to be a part following @. So let's add test and click submit. Oops. So it says dot is used at a wrong position in test, and com. So now this is valid, and then of course we don't get any invalid error. So you can see this type equals email is useful. You also see that input type equals submit adds a button for you, and when this submit button is clicked, then the form is processed, or the form data is submitted. Right now it's not going anywhere because we have not specified the action value. We could also specify the tag here, and so by default it says submit, so that's good enough for now. I'll add a new line here so we can we get the line break, so that we have all of these information on new lines. Okay, so now this is a basic form with name, email. You can play with radio buttons and so on. Now what I want to mention also is the ID tag with the input. It's important because when we will write JavaScript, we will need we will use this ID for selecting this particular input, so that we can get the value of the text box. And there is another thing which is name, and I will introduce name when we actually process the form, because name attribute is not required for JavaScript, or it doesn't help so much in validations and jQuery, so I'll skip that for now. But we do need ID, so for this one also I will also include email. Now you know that just to keep it clear, I'll add name info and email info for ID, because I don't want you to confuse and think that the type and ID have to be same. So in this case, input ID equals name info, and of course this has to match, because we are saying this label is for an element which has this ID, and so therefore the ID has to match here. Now in this case it doesn't have to be same. Okay, so this is just basic form, creating a basic HTML form. In the next lesson we will talk about input validation.